Welcome to Sword and Shield, the official podcast of the 960th Cyberspace Wing. Join us for insight, knowledge, mentorship, and some fun as we discuss relevant topics in and around our wing. Please understand that the views expressed in this podcast are not necessarily the views of the U.S. Air Force nor the Air Force Reserve, and no endorsement of any particular person or business is ever intended.
Good day, Gladiators. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Sword and Shield podcast. It's Frances Martinez, Director of Psychological Health for the 960th Cyberspace Wing, here with a very special guest, Major Kim Rigby. Welcome this morning. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So Major Rigby, I know your title is a mouthful, so I'm going to let you let our Gladiators know where you're calling in from and what your position is.
Yes, ma'am. I'm currently stationed at Air Force Global Strike Command headquarters at Barksdale Air Force Base, Louisiana, where I serve as the executive officer to the Director of Operations and Communications in our A36.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And, I try to do these podcasts with real life stories if I can possibly do that. And I heard your story at the Department of the Air Force Resiliency Summit. And it's really powerful to hear the challenges that you faced and how you overcame them. And knowing that, there is a way to come through some of those challenges. And so I'd like to, just open up and start a little bit about like your history, and then we can talk about the story that you shared at the summit.
Yeah, awesome. I would love to. So in terms of military history, I was not, I never thought this would be my path in life. I did not have a lot of family that was in the military. My grandfathers had both served in the Army and the Army Air Corps, but they never really talked about it. And, my path eventually led me to the Air Force. So I commissioned as an officer through officers training school. I was a little bit older when I was commissioned. I think I was 26 when I got my commission as a second lieutenant. And then from there, I went to Naval Air Station, Pensacola, for undergraduate navigator training. After I finished and got my wings there, I went to Barksdale Air Force Base for the first time, where I went to the formal training unit to learn how to fly the B-52 Stratofortress. I'm a weapons system officer by trade. You might know that as a navigator. So I'm responsible for all the weapons activity, making sure, bombs are on target on time is kind of my job. From there, I was stationed in Minot, North Dakota for almost 5 years. After that assignment, I moved to Pensacola, Florida again. The Air Force had stood up, but had brought their navigator training for undergraduates to Pensacola. So I had the opportunity to go back there and be part of the instructor cadre. And then finishing my time there, I moved to Barksdale, where I started my current position. So it's been a fun ride. I've seen 3 different bases, a lot of the central time zone, and I have deployed deployed twice with the B-52 in support of the Indo-PACOM Continuous Bomber Presence mission. So I've been out to Guam twice with my squadron when I was actively flying in support of that mission, which was a really great opportunity to take part in as well.
Well, I think that's amazing because, I think we're in the newer era where there's more female pilots, but I grew up, my dad was Army, and there, we never talked about any female pilots in the military. And so I think that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's been a great experience. I remember getting to my operational squadron, and the squadron had just been reactivated after quite a few years, and I was only the 3rd female to ever be part of it. So it's really cool. We're still breaking a lot of barriers in aviation, even though women have been part of those combat coded AFSCs for quite some time. But it's cool now. There's so many women joining the squadron, so it's great to see a new generation. That's not an atypical thing anymore.
Yeah. Amazing. And then you were just there, breaking barriers as well and being on that forefront of females in the military or women in the military. So thank you for that. And thank you for your service. And service hasn't always been easy. I'm sure you know that. And speaking from personal experience, my husband, he just retired from the Air Force in February. So my whole life has been military as well. And I know there's significant struggles that our people generally will face that are a little bit sometimes more difficult than being just a civilian on the outside.
Well, as you very well know, being part of a up until very recently, active duty family. I don't think our challenges in the military are any different than those of our civilian counterparts, but we face them differently because our support systems are sometimes very different, especially as I mentioned, with multiple PCSs that we all go through every, 3 to 4 years, often, learning a new area. If you have children, getting them into schools, a lot of that stuff can become really challenging. So I think there's sometimes for our military members, it maybe heightens things because depending on what you're going through, you may have a lot of new experiences that you're going through as well, along with regular life challenges.
Absolutely. All the PCSs are always fun, that's for sure. Depends on how you look at it.
Oh, yeah.
So I wanted to share, again, your story of your resiliency story. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to you and just give you the floor to share, some of the things that you've experienced in your life and how you came out of that and where you are today.
Yeah, I would love to. So, I mentioned earlier that I had gotten the opportunity to deploy twice with my squadron. One of those deployments was in 2014. And leading up to that, it looked like because of TDYs, I went to SOS, which is Squadron Officer School. Officers generally go to that while they're a captain, normally towards kind of the end of their captain time, and it's preparing them for, higher leadership. So I was going to that class for about 2.5 months, coming home, and I would be home over the holidays, the New Year's and, winter holidays, and then was going to be deploying early March. And I was expecting to come home from deployment and then probably go to an upgrade program as well. So we were, kind of on the brink of my husband and I looking at about 11 out of the next 13 months that I would probably be deployed and TDY, so we were kind of mentally preparing ourselves to be apart for quite a bit. But when I came home from that deployment, things had changed kind of pretty quickly. We had been married at that point for less than 2 years when we found out that John was diagnosed with stage 4B colorectal cancer. From the start, he had about an 11% chance of survival. And he was classified as terminal pretty much from diagnosis. So we started chemo for a while, and his results, were looking kind of good. Some tumors that were shrinking, and we kind of went back and forth with his oncologist. They reached out to the Mayo Clinic as well for some advice. And what they recommended was surgery to remove the primary tumor. It was kind of hard at that point to find a lot of balance with my career. Finding harmony in my new role as John's primary caregiver was kind of challenging. We didn't have family nearby in the area. All of our family lived in the Northeast. So, folks couldn't just easily come over and, take some of that burden off of us. And obviously, with deployment schedules and an ops tempo, being part of an operational squadron, there wasn't a lot that I could ask of my peers, so there were some challenges for that. And especially for myself, during that time, I felt like I was letting folks down at work. I felt like I was letting folks down at home, and it was tough. About a year into John's diagnosis, I had the opportunity to go TDY to do an instructor upgrade. I mentioned I was anticipating doing that right after deployment, but we obviously put that off because of John's situation. And since he was doing a little better, I leapt on the opportunity, in the hopes that I could maybe that would help me keep on track, with my peers. Mm-hmm. But a couple of weeks later, when I returned from that training, John was much worse. His condition had quickly deteriorated, following that surgery. So we had quite a few doctor's visits, some trips to the ER, and everyone was kind of telling us that he was fine. But, I'm seeing him in front of me, and I could tell that something was not right with him. Like, he wasn't fine. He was struggling to eat. He was struggling to get out of bed. He was in constant pain. And this is a man that was, really active. He had been active duty military himself. He worked at the airport in town, at the general aviation area, loved his work, loved his colleagues. But now, he's not even getting out of bed. So I could tell something was wrong, but it was quite a struggle to get any doctors or medical folks to listen to me. Eventually, I guess I was persistent enough, calling and kind of begging for help because his oncology team ordered some new scans. And when we got the results of those, we found out that not only were his tumors, no longer shrinking, they were growing back because we had to pause chemo because of the surgery. But what the scans also showed was that John had a really nasty infection and was going to need emergency surgery. And what we found out was the only hospital that was equipped to care for him was 2 hours away, because at the time we were in Minot, North Dakota, which if any of you have been stationed there, can be a pretty remote area. It's not exactly a big city. There's quite resources in town, but it's not always the resources that you may have in a larger city. So I got him in my car and we drove to that hospital as soon as we could. They took him in for emergency surgery. He had quite a few surgeries after that. The infection that he had, they were really surprised that he wasn't in worse condition. He was pretty bad, but they were honestly surprised that it hadn't been worse than it was, that we hadn't lost him. The infection was so bad that it had eaten away his entire tailbone. He had almost half a dozen surgeries to clean out the infected tissue and debride the wound and try to clean it up as best as possible. And following that, he was hospitalized for about 2 months while he had surgical and pain management needs. We had some challenges with EFMP at the time. And I would give the caveat that my experience was in 2014 and 2015 with EFMP. I obviously have not been on the program for some time, and I know there have been some changes. So if you are reaching out to EFMP for help or are part of the program, please seek more info, because my information is a little bit dated and my experience is dated. But prior to that, EFMP had determined that the level of care that he needed, he could get in North Dakota. Well, we were kind of looking forward and saying, this diagnosis isn't great. We probably need to be somewhere with better resources in case his condition deteriorates. But at the time, at least, that was not what EFMP's structure was like. Again, I'm not 100% sure how it's changed these days, if it has. So please seek out that info if you're working with the program. But because of his new condition after this hospitalization, we did qualify for a move. They did determine that he couldn't get the level of care he needed, which added kind of another layer of stress, because now, he's challenged to walk. He's challenged just to sit up. And obviously this wound is on his backside. So it's challenging just to sit. And now we're looking at a cross-country PCS from Minot, North Dakota, the very north of the country, to Pensacola, Florida, on the Gulf Coast.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So we're looking cross country, a 4-day move. So getting that planned, with him and his condition was very challenging. During that time, I think I learned a lot about sharing what was going on, being open and not waiting for my leadership to, maybe ask questions, not waiting to think that I was going to burden them with something. So I decided to just be upfront and open with my leadership and my flight doc about what I was facing. I didn't want to feel like I wasn't meeting expectations, but I wanted to work with them to manage the expectations of what I could give. Because for me, making a choice between my career and my husband was a no-brainer. Like, the Air Force was going to take a back seat. So my commander and I made a new deal. He would help me find some solutions that worked for me, instead of just making assumptions of what he felt like I could do or what would be too much for me. And, I talked to my flight doc as well, and made a deal with him that I would be open about what was going on, with John and I, what I was struggling with, how I was feeling, not only physically, but emotionally and mentally. And I was very lucky, because in the unit I was in, we were geographically separated in this new unit at Pensacola. So we only had 2 flight docs. So they got to know the instructor cadre really, really well. We didn't have a lot of changeover. So it was really good. We got to build relationships with our medical team. That deal paid off really well. During the routine flight physical, while the IDMTs were kind of taking my blood pressure and doing, the normal vitals and workup, they found that both my blood pressure and my heart rate were kind of off the charts, and I'm kind of just like, this is every day. Like, I feel fine, and as they kind of did some more tests, my flight doc, I remember him saying to me, he's like, Nike, it's time that someone takes care of you, and explained to me that, what I was feeling was all kind of, what they were seeing in the tests was kind of, the manifestation of this like fight, flight, freeze from like 3 years at this point of living with constant stress. So right then and there, he talked to me about it. He pulled me off flying status. He got me referred to a therapist that, he was one of his colleagues in the medical facility, just to get me the mental health help that I needed and the support that I needed. They diagnosed me at the time with situational depression and anxiety, which was really just kind of a manifestation of everything that was going on, with John's condition, trying to manage and balance it. And what they did was they helped me get started both with, talk therapy with my new therapist, and with some medication to help manage the depression symptoms, so that I could, use it as a support mechanism to help me be there in the ways that I needed to be in my life, both at work and for John. Not too long after that happened, we had some more setbacks with John medically. He was hospitalized following a seizure. And after a really tough and confusing week of him in the hospital, we learned that his tumors had grown pretty rapidly. He was still not doing chemo because of the wound, wound control, wound management, and they were concerned that chemo would kind of reopen that. And, it was kind of a catch-22. But because of that, what we learned was that his liver at that time was more cancer than it was liver tissue. He had a lot of new and larger tumors in his lungs. They were really really surprised that he could breathe as well as he could. And, when they talked to us, they said, there really aren't any options left to treat him. Your option is to start hospice care and palliative care for him. And that they thought that he had maybe a month, maybe a little bit longer. We took him home. We did home hospice with him for about 3 weeks. His condition kind of continued to deteriorate. At that point, we, were really just concerned with pain management. He had, round the clock pain meds, and we were just trying to keep him as comfortable as possible. And we did get to a point where we could no longer care for him at home, and we needed to take him to inpatient hospice. He was there for about a week when I got the call one morning while I was getting ready to go visit him that he had passed away, that day. There's really not a day that goes by that I don't think about him. He was so proud of everything that I, had accomplished and everything that was on the horizon for me in the Air Force. So every time I have a new milestone, or I have an opportunity to share, my story a little bit like this, I think about him. But I also think about the things that I learned during that time. And in terms of resilience, what I learned the most is that my resilience was bolstered through connection. When I started sharing what was going on, folks just rose to the occasion to support me, to give me the help that I needed. And for me, that all came to be because I realized I couldn't do it alone anymore. Not sharing, not telling people what I was going through wasn't working. And, who knows where I would have been if that flight doc didn't step in, if I hadn't been open with him, because I don't know every day that we're, sometimes we don't necessarily always have the time to just see what's going on with folks, and we'll see each other in the hallway. Hey, how are you? I'm good. We often don't say what we're really feeling. So I learned that by sharing, by just being open and answering that question honestly. My friends from my squadron, my leadership, my flight doc, those folks who surrounded me were able to jump in and help me. So connection has been, a huge piece for me in terms of resilience.
And that's just the theme of the Air Force Resiliency Program is, staying connected to be protected. And it's 100% true, right? Like if we're so isolated, we're going to just deteriorate. But if we stay connected, checking and being good wingmen, then we can actually get some, traction and solve some problems and getting people to the right resources.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, as we think about leadership, it doesn't matter if you're an A1C or a second lieutenant, or, if you're a colonel or a senior master sergeant, everyone can be a leader. Leadership is about empathy. And it's about compassion and it's about taking care of people. And I firmly believe that, our folks are going to get the mission done. I don't think we need to reiterate how important the missions that we all do are every single day, to the Air Force and to our country. But for our airmen and guardians, to be able to do their missions, they need to know that they're taken care of, we need to know that our basic needs are being met, whether that's food, water, shelter, or maybe that's connection. We need to know that those things are in place to support us. And, that's leadership, reaching out and connecting. But I would also challenge everyone, be open and share your story because, we don't know everything. I don't know everything that's going on with the members of my team, but I do when we have the moments to connect, when we get to know each other. So yeah, 100%. I think that support and being there for each other, when you're struggling and you can't take much more, let the folks around you be there to lift you up and give you the support you need.
And some other points that you talked about is that the work-life balance, right? You were struggling with a home life because of, what was going on with John and his medical needs, but also just talking to your leadership and talking about expectations and where you currently are. And I think people are scared sometimes to do that because they're not sure what the outcome will be. But I think sometimes if we have those open, dialogues and say, hey, this is what's really going on, more than likely, your leadership is going to be on board and supportive of what's, happening in that person's life.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's so important. I mean, every person that's part of your team needs to be a part of that. We talk about, family care plans for folks with children should something happen, and you need assistance. Being open and honest about what is going on is going to help them find solutions for you. One thing I realized as I have 14 years in the Air Force now, and one thing I've realized as my career has progressed and I've moved is everywhere I go, my network just gets a little bit bigger. I meet folks like yourself and I have those resources to lean back on. And I realized that I don't always have the answers. I'm a B-52 navigator by trade. I'm not going to be able to answer tough medical questions. I don't have the same knowledge, that our FSS has, but we're all part of a team. And I do know, the FSS commander, I do know some people across base, and I can use those connections to help get you the support that you might need. So I think letting people know what you need, what you're capable of, and basically kind of setting up like an airman care plan, when you're going through tough times. This is what I can do. Hey, you know what? Maybe for me, it was kind of before the times of VPNs and telework that we've all experienced in the last year or so. But, these days, if there's someone that's in a situation like I was, maybe telework a couple days a week is absolutely a way that they can give back and find better harmony between what's going on in their personal life and in their professional life. So it just takes being creative. I think on our end, it takes being, like I said, open and honest about what you can do. We can't always give 100% each day, but like if you know that you can do 75%, then man, give it all of your 75%. And you know what? Maybe the next day you'll be able to give 100, or maybe the next day you can give 60. But if you can bring yourself fully to your capabilities that day, for me as a leader, like I'm going to work with you to help get you the support that you need and help you, still be a valued member of the team and help you find the harmony that you need in those difficult situations.
And I know for the Air Force Reserve Command, General Goby, and then our wing commander, Colonel Airage, are very big about, taking care of airmen and their families. That's like number one. Obviously we have missions that has to get completed, but if we're not taking care of the people that are running the mission, then, there's a ripple effect, right? And so that is our number one priority, at least in the wing. And then with the Air Force Reserve Command is just taking care of our people.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I remember I got to take part in the DAF Women's Air and Space Power Symposium, and Chief Toberman, the Space Force chief, shared a bit about the Platinum Rule with us, which if you haven't heard that, it's treat others how they want to be treated. And, I think that's exactly what you said. That's what your wing and reserve is getting after. How do others want to be treated? How can I meet you where you're at? And that's all about connection. Let the team around you connect with you, share your story, and actively listen to the stories of those around you. And then, find out how you can help.
Exactly. One last thing before we, wrap up, I want to touch on the mental health piece because in the military, there's that big myth that if I go seek mental health, I'm going to lose my clearance. I'm not going to have a job. I'm going to get kicked out. And again, it's like that part that we're just trying to constantly demystify and tell people it's okay to get help. It's when you don't seek help and something bad happens, then that's when, we're faced with different challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned that. I'll share a little more detail on my experience with that. So I mentioned that my flight doc pulled me off flying status, that I started, going to therapy, and, I kind of had like an open invite to come. I didn't really have set times, but I could just give a call. They'd put me on the schedule for that week, with my doc, but that they also put me on medication. So I was diagnosed with situational depression and anxiety, which was kind of a response to everything that was going on, the stressors that I was feeling. My docs put me on Prozac for everyday use, which really helped kind of calm me. I felt less stressed. Like I didn't feel those physical manifestations that I have to be honest, they were so gradual over time that I didn't feel a difference. It was just my new normal, but they could see it showing up medically, so that's how they noticed. But that helped kind of lessen that, it helped lessen that fight, flight, freeze. It helped me, just kind of relax a little bit. And they also gave me Xanax for times when, maybe the Prozac just wasn't doing it, and I needed to kind of stop the bleeding, I guess, if I was having a really bad day. I didn't need to use that very much. When things got really rough with John, we were taking him into inpatient hospice, and after he passed, I did. But for me, the process to get back up on flying status was that I had to be off that medication for 6 months and then just have a quick, medical eval with my doc, which was just kind of the normal PHA workup. How are you feeling? Vitals. For me as a flyer, that was a little bit different because it was controlled substance. And as an aviator, there's a little bit different rules than, our average airman may see. So if you are on a special duty, position like that, or maybe you're a defender or an aviator, or as our strikers in Global Strike know, working with missiles or something, certain duties like that, you may have those, waiver requirements to get back up on status. I'm also, when I'm flying B-52s, I'm up on the Personnel Reliability Program, which is a, screening program to work around nuclear weapons. That did not hurt hurt my chances to get back on PRP when I'd be back in an active position. Since I'm on staff right now, I'm not up on PRP because I don't work with the weapons. So that's only when you're physically in a position where you would, but I have zero limitations to go back onto PRP should I have an assignment that requires it. I have a TS SCI that hasn't impacted any of that. I've seen zero impacts to my clearances, to my ability to do my job, to get back on flying status because of that. And, I think part of that is that I was open and honest about everything that was going on. I needed assistance. I sought it out. I got it and, was honest with my docs about when I felt like it was right to stop, taking those things, to stop that. I didn't need that extra help any longer. So yeah, I think be open and honest about it. Those resources are there for you. And, your medical teams are there to help you. They're there to get you fixed. Mental health is nothing to joke about. And I like to tell folks, you would go to the doctor if you broke your leg, especially if there was a bone sticking out. We'd definitely go to the ER. We'd get that leg set. We'd go get the x-rays. We'd go get the surgery. We would do all the things to fix it and get back, as quickly as we could. So why not do that when, you're struggling a little bit mentally, or struggling a lot mentally? You can't see that as easily, but it is just as important, if not more, to get yourself right mentally.
Exactly. And that's what, we are striving to debunk those myths and make sure that people do have access to care and are seeking the care that they need. Major Rigby, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure. I know sometimes talking and reliving the stories can be a little bit traumatic, but I truly appreciate you sharing your story with us today.
Well, thanks for having me. And, I always tell folks, if me sharing my story helps one airman out there to connect, then it is all worth it. If there's anyone out there who's listening to this who is, going through something similar, or of an airman or guardian that's going through something similar, I'm in the global Kimberley.Rigby at us.af.mil. I'm always happy to connect with folks. So please reach out if there's any way that I can help you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And Gladiators, if you or someone are contemplating suicide, please contact the National Suicide Hotline at 1-800-273-8255. Thank you again, Nike, for joining us, and Gladiators out.